Welcome back to another episode of Bible Conversations. Today, we're going to be talking about a question that people often ask. Is it okay to be angry with God? Well, welcome back, everybody. Generally this question doesn't come in the form of a question. It comes in the form of a statement. Yeah. I am angry with God.
Yeah.
But I think the
people
question,
don't typically ask for permission before they state they're angry with God.
I think the question, though, is a valid one. Is it okay to be angry with God? Is that something that we are allowed to do?
Yeah.
And I think we have to start first with anger, right? Just in general.
Mm-hmm.
What is anger? Is it okay to be angry? All of those things. So, briefly, anger is the, negative emotion. It can be used for a positive force, but it's a negative emotion associated with generally bad things that have happened or bad things that have occurred, to where you have within you aggression, you have within you irritation, frustration, all of these different things that kind of pile up. And they cause you to act or behave in a certain manner, right? Yelling, screaming, hitting, throwing, things of that nature. Sometimes anger presents itself in silence. You don't say anything. You remove yourself from everybody.
Yeah.
And so anger can be both loud and quiet in its form. But anger is certainly a part of life. And I believe that we are allowed to be angry. We look at the idea, we'll start first with God created us in his own image.
Yeah.
And then we look at the flood and what God was angry.
Yeah.
Now his was a righteous anger.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Our anger is rarely.
Often unrighteous. Yeah.
rarely righteous, right?
Yeah.
And so the question, what is it? Well, talked about what it is. Are we allowed to be angry? Well, yes.
Yeah.
We are allowed to be angry. I don't know if you're there right now, but there's
Ephesians 4.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What does it say?
Yeah, Ephesians 4:26. It says, "Be angry and do not sin.
Yeah.
Do not let the sun go down on your anger and give no opportunity for the devil." I can't tell you how many times my dad quoted that to me and my siblings as we got into fights, especially if it was in the afternoon or evening. It was, you need to make up before you go to bed that night. Because if you go to bed with that anger on your heart, then it's just going to stew from there. Satan is going to use that to build that anger into sin. Yeah. And so the premise that you're starting with is, I think, absolutely accurate. That anger is a natural emotion that we experience. We're made in the image of God. Anger is one of the things that God has. He's a righteous, but he's also a jealous God. He's a loving God, but he's also a just God. And anger is one of those characteristics or attributes that God possesses. And being made in his image, we're made with that same attribute, that same characteristic of anger.
We have the ability to become angry.
Absolutely. But we cannot let sin creep in due to that anger.
Correct, yeah. You look at Genesis chapter 4, right? Genesis 4, Cain and Abel. This is, literally a story as old as time.
Yeah. Just about.
Just about. You've got, in chapter 4, we'll start in verse 1. Verse 1, now Adam knew Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. And again she bore his brother Abel. Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock, and of their fat portions, and the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. All right, well, so we know that sacrifices were in place at this point, at least to the degree that they were told from God what to do. Mm-hmm. We know that they understood, Cain, Abel, Adam, and Eve, they understood that they had a responsibility to worship the Lord.
Yep.
And they also understood that their worship was to be worthy of God, right? Yeah. And so all of that within those first 4 verses is mentioned, but there's something else that occurs right after at the second part of verse 5. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. Mm-hmm. Well, why was Cain angry?
Because his worship wasn't acceptable.
Yeah.
His worship wasn't pleasing in the sight of God.
Exactly. So who should he have been mad with?
Himself.
Who was he mad at?
God.
God and Abel.
And Abel, yeah.
Right? And so we look at what happens.
Yeah, actually, I said God, but primarily Abel.
Primarily Abel.
Yeah.
And we look at what happens next, and we see that jealousy, I think, is such an integral part of this idea of anger. Mm-hmm. Not always, but it is certainly a contributing factor to it.
Yeah.
And Cain looks at his brother, and this is, at least, we're not told this in the text, but this is how I understand it. He looks at his brother and realizes, well, if my brother Abel wasn't here, my offering would have been accepted.
Yeah.
It would have been
the
the best offering, right? And what he's failing to realize is that God's standards for offering is not based on what other people do.
Yeah.
It's based on what he accepts.
He's thinking, I'd have the best offering by default.
Exactly, right? And so he kills his brother.
Yeah.
Because of that anger. He allows the jealousy to lead to anger, to lead to murder.
But
right?
pay attention to the question that God asks him, though. Yeah. In verse 6 and 7, he says, why are you angry, and why is your face fallen?
Yeah.
If you do well, will you not be accepted? He doesn't say to Cain, stop being angry. He says, why are you angry? Yeah. Like, what is brought upon this emotion? Yeah. And I think that's an important question as we're talking about anger, is what are we going to do with that emotion as it comes up? Well, with that anger, it's not well, just stop it. Stop being angry. Like, just cut it out of your life. That's not being realistic. Instead, it's, why are you angry? What has brought it upon? And how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to handle it?
Well, and I think that first question, why, is so important to figure out, because oftentimes
absolutely
just knowing why you're angry actually reduces your anger.
Yeah.
Because you realize we are a logical people. That is how God has made us, to be logical. Yep. Some of us are more logical than others. Some of us are more emotional than others. Some of us, we all handle things in different ways, but we are a logical people by nature. And so when we can realize, oh, I'm not actually angry at Abel. I'm angry at myself because I didn't do what I was supposed to do.
Yep.
Well, then our anger gets redirected into something that can be positive. Now we can say, okay, I'm going to do better.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to bring the first fruits of the ground. I'm going to bring the best of the ground. And I'm going to give to God what God deserves. Because if you do well, will it not be accepted?
Yeah, absolutely.
And God's next statement, sin is crouching at the door. Right? So when we consider anger, there are two directions that we can go. We can do good or we can do evil, right? There's really very little in between with anger. You're either going to do something and use that anger to do well, to do good, or that anger is going to it'll be inside of you, it'll grow.
It'll turn into hate.
It'll turn into hate, and eventually, and it may be immediate, it may be in a year, maybe in 10 years, it will turn into something bad. It will turn into something sinful.
Yeah.
And so we really have to be
And that's
watchful.
what happened with Cain.
Yes.
He let that anger turn into hate and turn into sin. And God even gave him the warning, but he still fell to that sin and he killed Abel.
Yeah.
So I love this example as giving us an introduction to that anger.
Yeah.
I also want to take our listeners to Job.
Yes.
Because as we discuss anger, obviously Cain is the one at fault here.
Yes.
Cain is the one where, if you look internally, then you can find the source of why you're angry.
Yeah.
It's because you need to put forth a better offering to God. And sometimes that's the answer to our anger, is looking internally. I have not given my best to God.
Yeah.
And so that's what I need to do. But sometimes that's not the answer.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's people like Job who have been giving their best to God, who have been giving everything they can to God, and are faithful servants to God, and yet things still don't seem to be working out the way that they should.
Yes.
And so, let's turn to Job. Sorry, I got to flip over there because I was talking instead of flipping.
You're good. I'm already there.
Okay,
I knew where you were going before.
Well, as we're introduced to Job here, we see that he's a very blessed man. He's been blessed with so many possessions, so many riches, so much wealth, that God has just really blessed him abundantly.
Yeah.
But Satan wants to test Job. He says the only reason Job serves you is because you have blessed him. Let me take away what he has, and then he won't serve you anymore. He won't bless you in return. Instead he'll actually curse you. And so that's the argument that Satan is having with the Almighty. And so God allows Satan to do what he wants to with Job, but he says you cannot take his life. You can do whatever you want, but you cannot take Job's life. That's the stipulation that God has put before Satan.
Yeah.
And so Satan does. He really attacks Job. He takes his family, he takes his riches, his possessions, his livestock, and even his health. In chapter 2 of Job, Satan attacks his health. He has boils all over his skin, which we don't really get boils much anymore today. But think of just incredibly itchy and festering blisters all over your body.
Painful too.
Painful. Yes, very painful. And that's the situation Job finds himself in.
Yeah.
Now, there's anger, obviously. There has to be. Yeah. And yet it's a different answer when you ask the question why than with Cain. When Job asks why, he's not going to find himself saying, well, I didn't give everything I had to God.
Yeah. Well, in chapter 10, because there are 2 chapters that I think, there's a lot of chapters that we could go to and see.
Oh, yeah.
But I think we see the progression here. So chapter 10, verse 1, Job is talking to God, right? And he starts this discourse in chapter 9. But in chapter 10, he starts with, I loathe my life. I will give free utterance to my complaint. I will speak in the bitterness of my soul. I will say to God, do not condemn me. Let me know why you contend against me. Does it seem good to you to oppress, to despise the work of your hands and favor the designs of the wicked? Have you eyes of flesh? Do you see as man sees? Are your days as the days of man, or your years as a man's years? That you seek out my iniquity and search for my sin, although you know that I am not guilty, and there is none to deliver out of your hand? I mean, you can feel the anger. You can feel the frustration. And the frustration, at least in part, is at God.
Yeah, well, definitely frustration and anger towards God, because even at the end of that chapter in verse 18, he says, why did you bring me out from the womb?
Yeah.
Would that I had died before any eye had seen me, were as though I had not been carried from the womb to the grave. Are not my days few? Then cease and leave me alone, that I may find a little cheer before I go, and I shall not return to the land of darkness and deep shallow, and land of gloom like thick darkness, like deep shadow without any order, where light is as thick as darkness. He's saying to God, why'd you even make me?
Yeah.
Like if this has become my life, why did you make me?
Yeah. What is the purpose of me being here, right? And so he starts with this questioning of God's intent and purpose, right? He's saying, listen, God, I don't understand.
Yeah.
What is happening? What is going on? Why is this happening, right? And this continues for a little bit, and then we get to 23, chapter 23, because he's gone through this kind of this questioning of why is this happening, right? And his friends respond, and his friends, well, they kind of suck.
They're not helpful.
They kind of suck. Yeah, they're awful. And then we get to 23, and Job, he replies to Eliphaz, and he says, today also my complaint is bitter. My hand is heavy on account of my groaning. Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. I would know that he would answer me and understand what he would say to me. Would he contend with me in the greatness of his power? No, he would pay attention to me. There an upright man could argue with him, and I would be acquitted forever by my judge. He goes from questioning why to now thinking, oh, I wish I could have my day with God. I'd tell him the what for.
Yeah, he better have some answers for me.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it goes from this idea of Job starts out as this wealthy and prosperous and happy man.
Yeah.
To God, why has this befallen me? To Lord, I'm going to tell you why you're wrong.
Yeah.
And you can see this anger, it builds and it builds and it builds sometimes in our lives too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We go through times where we get angry at people, or maybe we get angry at God. And we start to question, well, God, why are you allowing this? Why are you doing this? And then we start to think to ourselves, if I had an audience with God, I could change his mind.
Yeah. But what's so fascinating about Job, and this is why I love the study of Job so much, because it's so in depth that there's so much study that can go into Job, because even as he's feeling that and thinking, I really wish I could just lay my case before God and I'd love to hear his answer,
Yeah.
It's kind of like there's no way he has a good answer to what's going on.
Yeah.
But when Bildad speaks to Job in chapter 25, then Job then returns talking about almost coming to God's defense, kind of like, well, his majesty is beyond our understanding. Job kind of almost backtracking, like, I can be angry at God, but you can't be angry at God on my behalf. It's kind of like, watch it. God's understanding still is beyond us. It's still more than we can understand. In verse 12 of chapter 26, by his power, he stilled the sea. By his understanding, he shattered Rahab. By his wind, the heavens were made. By his hand, pierced the fleeing serpent. Behold, these are but the outskirts of his ways. In other words, this is just a little bit of what he's done.
Yeah.
And how small a whisper do we hear of him? But the thunder of his power, who can understand? In other words, he's beyond us. And so Job is still struggling with this internally of, I'm angry, I don't understand, I want to question God, but I still in the back of my mind know that he is greater than me. He is the Almighty. Yeah. And that's honestly where I think a lot of Christians struggle today. Yeah. Because it's I'm angry. There's frustrations going on in life, whether it's it's the loss of a loved one and the stage of grief that you're at is that anger stage, or maybe it's just life has become difficult. Things aren't falling into place. Things are frustrating and are difficult, and we want to have a source to direct our anger. Yeah. And yet in the back of our mind, we still say, but he's still the Almighty.
Yeah. His
ways are still greater than mine. I know I cannot understand it, and yet it's just not working out. I still am frustrated, know?
And I think, having that frustration is understandable.
Absolutely.
People go through struggles and trials and difficulties, and sometimes you can't help but be frustrated. It's a frustrating situation. It's an awful situation, and I think we have to find ways. And I know that this is so much easier said than done. We have to find ways to be productive with our frustration, to be productive with our anger, to work through it. Again, figuring out, why am I angry? And maybe we need somebody to sit there with us and just ask us questions, to try to understand, not to try to solve, not to try to figure out, how it relates to the person who's asking, but rather just to say, I'm here to listen to you.
Yeah.
What's going on? And a lot of times that helps. That's such a big help. And that's what Job's friends should have done.
Yeah, absolutely.
They should have just sat there and listened. But what they tried to do is what I am so often guilty of, which is trying to solve the problem. And trying to place myself in those shoes, and trying to make it about me and what I could do to help. And rather than just saying, hey, what do you need?
Yeah.
And God, in his infinite wisdom in chapter 38, answers Job.
Yeah. And
for us as Christians, we should understand that God is almighty, that he is the great I am, the Alpha, the Omega. He spoke the world into existence. And sometimes I think we forget that. And I think Job forgot it, or at least didn't fully respect.
He was struggling with it. I think he was definitely going back and forth, because we even in verse 20 or in chapter 27, he says, as God lives, who has taken away my right, and the Almighty, who has made my soul bitter, as long as my breath is in me and the Spirit of God is in my nostrils, my lips will not speak falsehood, and my tongue will not utter deceit. Yeah. Far be it from me to say that you are right. Till I die, I will not put away my integrity from me. I hold fast my righteousness and will not let it go. My heart does not reproach me for any of my days. He's trying to hold fast to, I can't blame God.
Yeah.
He's trying to hold fast. And like I said, Job is a fantastic study because there's different angles you can look at it from. There's the angle of his friends who are just accusing Job. They're like, well, you must have done something wrong in order to be punished in this way.
Yeah.
And then there's Job knowing he hasn't done anything wrong, thinking, can I question God? Surely God must not be as good as I think he is, or if he is, there's just something I'm not understanding. And so I think you're about to read chapter 38 for us, which is fantastic. God's response to Job that humbles him, that humbles all of us when we read it.
Yeah.
But the way I'd like to summarize Job and this back and forth that he's going throughout this book, and the back and forth that we often find ourselves in, where we want to question, we don't understand, we're thinking, why God? I'm angry at God. The way that I remember when I was younger, this being explained to me, is that it's okay to say, I don't understand. It's okay to say, this doesn't make any sense to me. I'm not following where this is leading, but where we might overstep is when we say, why are you doing it this way? Yeah. And it's an interesting nuance to those differences of saying, I don't understand versus saying, tell me why.
Yes.
Because one is just saying, personally, I'm not following. I don't understand God's bigger plan. The second one is telling God, hey, I need you to inform me of your plans for my life so that I can check them off and say, I'm okay with this.
Yeah.
And that's where, no, we don't get the right to do that because of how great God is. And that's what God explains in chapter 38 of how great he is, that we don't have the right to question him.
Yeah. When we recall in 23, Job is saying, I wish that God could be here so that I could question him, right?
Yeah.
And so I think God here is responding obviously to all of it, but especially to that little section, right?
Yeah.
Because he comes in and he says, the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. Now, if God ever says that to me, man.
So I love that because it's almost like, oh, you're ready to talk now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's take this outside.
Yeah, basically. It's like, oh, son, you're not ready type of answer.
He says, I will question you and you make it known to me. So now he's taking Job's words, in essence, and just flipping them on Job. He says, where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy? Or who shut in the sea with doors when it burst out from the womb? When I made clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. And he goes on, God goes on for 2 full chapters.
Oh, it's incredible. I love just reading through this.
Yes.
Looking at God's power.
Yeah.
I mean, and he uses his creation to show his power. I mean, in chapter 39, he talks about the mountain goats, the wild donkeys, the ox, the ostrich. There's so much of his creation that he uses as an example to show his power.
Yeah. And then chapter 40, verse 1, the Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. Then Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further.
Yeah, but God doesn't stop. He doesn't take that as a good enough humbling. And so he says again, dress for action like a man. Yeah. and he goes on to talk about the behemoth, the Leviathan, into chapter 41 and continuing. And he just he's telling Job, this is who I am.
Yeah.
You are my creation. You are the clay. I am the potter. The clay doesn't get to question the potter and say, why did you make me in this way? The clay doesn't get to question the potter and say, why did you set me on this shelf? Or why did you put this flower in the vase that I am? Yeah. Like maybe you're holding a rose and you wanted to hold a sunflower. That's up to the potter, not up to the vase.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important to remember that as God created us, he did not make mistakes.
No.
We look through Genesis chapter 1, and everything that God made, he said, and it is good.
Yeah.
And then when he made woman to go with man, he said, it's very good. But that shows us that God doesn't make mistakes. Every part of his creation, he created to be perfect.
Yeah.
Because
intentionality.
Because he is perfect. Yeah. Yes. And so when we question God and say, this isn't perfect, then we're quite honestly saying you're wrong, God. And so that's why I go back to saying it's okay to say, I don't understand.
Yeah.
But if we turn to God and say, number one, why? You need to explain your plans to me. No, the clay doesn't get to question the potter. But number two, if we turn to God and say, no, this is not perfect, this is not the way that my life should be, then now we're saying you're wrong.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's acceptable for us to, I don't understand. Lord, please help me understand why.
Absolutely. Right? I think that's appropriate.
Yeah, Lord, I am really struggling with this, and I would love to know, right? Like whereas it's a humility. It's not asking. It's not telling God you need to.
Yes.
But it is asking God for that, and it's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard thing to wrap our minds around the idea that we have the Creator of the universe that we can talk to at any point of the day, at any time of the day.
Yeah.
And we know that whatever we ask of Him, we shall receive if we ask in faith, right? But then we ask some things, and we don't receive those things, and we think we deserve those things, and they are something that ought to be in our life. And
I think we have to remember the only thing that we're deserving of is
death.
Death.
Yeah. And it is a difficult realization to have. And some people in their lowest points realize this. Some people in their highest points realize this, right? That God is in control. Mm-hmm. And for us to be angry with Him is to question Him, and so there's a phrase in the scripture, help me with my unbelief, right? Well, asking God for that. Yeah. Lord, help me with my unbelief. Yeah. Or even saying, God, I feel angry with you and I don't want to.
Yeah.
Please help me.
Yeah.
I think is a valid thing.
I think so.
I think it's again natural for us to be angry, and that anger is directed at something. People aren't just angry for the sake of being angry. They're angry at something or at someone. And to recognize why we are angry, if that anger is directed at God, Lord, I don't want to feel this way towards you.
Yeah. And I think that's going back to in the study of Cain and Abel, asking why am I angry, and seeing the source of that. And quite honestly, like we said at the beginning, a lot of it stems from jealousy and comparison, but a lot of it is not within our understanding. And so that's when we have to turn to God and say, I am striving to be humble. Please help me.
Please help my unbelief.
Yeah, please help my unbelief. Absolutely. So, I don't really have a better way to put a bow on this conversation.
No, this is such a nuanced and difficult conversation, and we're just two guys, and there are many different, I would say, opinions or at least viewpoints that may provide some better insight. Perspectives, yeah. If you have some different perspectives, some different insights into this topic that you would like to share with us, please do. You can send us an email. You'll hear that here in just a minute. But we thank you so much for listening, and we ask that you hang around just a little longer to hear how you can help us. Hope you all have a wonderful and blessed week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Bible Conversations. We want to ask if you have any questions, suggestions, or comments that you please email us at kcocbibleconversations@gmail.com.
You can also find us on social media. We've got a Facebook page as well as an Instagram account. Our Facebook page is very simple. It's just Bible Conversations. On Instagram, it's very simple, at Bible Conversations. Look us up, like our posts, and share it with your friends.
We also have an opportunity for you to help us financially through a store via Kim's Closet, and you can find that. You can just type into Google Kim's Closet. We have a link as well that we will be posting in each of our episodes, and we just hope that you'll reach out and find us and purchase a hoodie or a shirt with the logo on it, and that way you can spread the word without having to say a word. So we appreciate you. Thank you all. Have a blessed week.